Okay, great to be here. Welcome to all of you. It's a great privilege to be able to share with you. I also want to thank the university for all the opportunities that they give us professors to do research. And I, coming from South America, where they don't have those luxuries in our universities, as we do here, we appreciate it even more, what opportunities of research are presented here. My assignment for this presentation was to explain to you my research, what I do. And so that's what I am trying to do, and I am only going to enunciate it without any intent to explain it. Because if I were to go into explanation, it may take from 15 to 20 hours, through dialogue and all the things that will follow from there. I entitled this the Adventist Sola Scriptura Research Project, an introductory outline. So first, a little bit of history, the starting point of this project. This is a project that started with two main discoveries of mine. 35 years ago, I was not in Hesdon, I was studying my graduate studies in philosophy in a Roman Catholic university in my country, and I was taking a course on Heidegger's view of the pre-Socratic philosophers. So you have something interesting there to chew. And I learned one interesting thing for me, that to know is to interpret. Up to that point, I thought that what I was learning was how things really were, actually. But then I discovered that philosophy, as I knew it, was only an interpretation of philosophers, that philosophers made of early philosophers from the perspective of the medieval Catholic perspective. This I learned from Heidegger. So all of a sudden I said, hey, wait a minute. Number one, philosophy can be understood in different ways, and perhaps what we understand about philosophy now is not the way in which philosophy was, because there is an interpretation in the middle. Then I learned that everything is interpretation. I don't know how this applies to mathematics yet, and I don't think that anybody actually knows that. But other than that, everything is an interpretation. What you are doing now, with what I am saying, is an interpretation. And so, to know is to interpret, and as it was presented, one thing can be interpreted in different ways, and at times it can be interpreted in a contradictory way, and the work of scholarship is to revisit and to study and to ground and to explain our knowledge that ultimately is an interpretation. One discovery. After that discovery 35 years ago, I came to discover that what we call postmodernity today is much based on insight of this kind. So I was a postmodern thinker before postmodernity. By the way, I got convinced that this is the way in which reason functions, and I did my doctoral dissertation, which included information about that. Second, being, reality is temporal, but Christianity and science assumes that reality is not temporal, but timeless. That's what I learned, and I learned from the philosophers, and I learned that from Heidegger as well in the same seminar. That was a real discovery, the one that shocked me back then. Because I understood that Adventism assumes reality as temporal, for instance, in the historicist interpretation of the prophecies, and in the white theological system, thought, and every writing is working in that direction. But all of a sudden I understood that Christianity is moving and developed and have developed on the basis that reality, the same reality that we understand historically, they understand it as timeless, and I could see immediately why we were different. I couldn't say whether we are right or wrong, but it was absolutely clear. And in the last 35 years, I have tried to explain the differences. And the differences are in the macro picture, in the micro picture, at every level, every doctrine, every interpretation of the text, you can see that, and much more than that. So these are the starting points of my research. Then I wrote my dissertation on theological reason, titled Time and Timelessness as Primordial Presuppositions. So I am giving you here in one shot my dissertation. Well, no, it's not my dissertation, but basic elements there. Every interpretation, hermeneutical structure, reason, everything that we are and think works within this. So you have there the subject, and then you have the object, basic elements of any experience and any scientific knowledge, which basically every knowledge is an interpretation. And so the notion in here is that the knowledge, which is an interpretation, is not caused by the object, nor is caused by the subject, but is caused by the subject and the object, and that's the way in which the interpretation grows. What is that the object brings to this is the object is there, so you have to understand that this is the fact, this is whatever, it comes to our minds, and this applies not just to theology, this applies to all our sciences, and you will see how that happens. You are working about that in your mind. But then you have what you bring to at that moment, that we have to have it, otherwise we will not make any sense. And we call that presuppositions, technically. So, knowledge is what we bring, the interaction of presuppositions with the object, and from the two, it comes our knowledge, and that knowledge is interpretation. What we produce as human beings. Then, I want to bring together this very same thing, looked at from the perspective of a philosopher of science, the very much renowned, studied and criticized Thomas Kuhn, with the structure of science and the scientific revolutions. What I was calling paradigm, he already was calling, what I was calling presuppositions in my dissertation, he was calling paradigm. Okay? So that's for you. Basically, it's something that applies not only to philosophy and applies not only to theology, it applies as well to science. And on that basis, what I am presenting to you affects everything that we do in the university and that we do at the church and that we do, in our ministry, personal or communion. So the question is, what is a paradigm? Okay, so let's ask Thomas Kuhn. Thomas Kuhn tells us that paradigm is the ensemble of the scientific community's shared beliefs, which includes a strong network of commitments, conceptual, theoretical, instrumental, and methodological. Basically, it's a set of ideas that we give priority and that we cannot transgress. And then, from that perspective, as a presupposition, we are able to see things. Problems come to view, solutions are possible, things are real or are unreal because we are committed to these ideas. Then we have what happened in theology. Hans Kuhn, a Roman Catholic dissident theologian, began to use the insights of Thomas Kuhn about paradigm and applied it to theology and created an interpretation of the history of Christianity as a succession of paradigms, and then as he presented the need to create a new paradigm, will be a new narrative for our times that will be an ecumenical paradigm, and he was working on that in the 80s. He says, using Kuhn, that a paradigm is an entire constellation of beliefs, values, and techniques, and so on, shared by the members of a given community. Okay? So basically it's the same idea applied there. So now we have Kuhn, and we have, for instance, a person that does some theology, the Pope, right? And the Pope has a paradigm. And the project, so you see, the Pope has a paradigm, the Pope has a theology, the Pope has the teachings of the Church, but the teaching of the Church in this perspective is a project. And you can have your other project. And all depends what are those shared beliefs that you commit yourself and why. So you really begin to see that these ideas are very important, and that we, or somebody, has to turn their critical eye into that to do some kind of unearthing and sifting and criticizing. Well, this is what I have been doing all my life. I am not going there, but this is what I could speak like 12 or 20 hours. And so there is a paradigm there, and of course he studies a fact. What is the fact for a Roman Catholic and many Christians? The tradition of the church. They don't go to the Bible, they go to the tradition of the church. So they have their own decisions in here that are the paradigm, which are the doctrines that they have, and then they have the tradition of the church, and then they make their own doctrines. Okay, you can draw your own conclusions there. But this applies also to all theologians, not just to the Pope. It applies to all teachers, to all thinkers. It applies to each one of you, and it applies to us as well, as Adventists. And it applies also to the evangelicals. So as I continue and try to move beyond the issue of paradigm to something deeper, I put there Luther, that reads the Bible clearly with a paradigm that is heavily dependent on the tradition of Roman Catholicism. But I bring, this is my conclusion, I have written on this, that this issue of talking about a paradigm shift is not the end of the story, nor the beginning of everything, because it is obvious that they are not talking about this, but deeper in the paradigm, behind the paradigm, maybe part of the paradigm, but not methodologically, there are some philosophical ideas that belong to the core of the philosophical tradition that determine the selection and the shape of the paradigm. That's where philosophy of science connect, and that's where philosophy and theology connect, and that's where Adventists have never gone. Because philosophy is not the place where we should go. And I can see, having been there, that it is a good pastoral advice for people that are searching the Lord. But it cannot be avoided by people that are in universities or have to give a public explanation of their faith. So it is from that interaction that I continue my presentation and this project. Now, in an Adventist language, we will not talk about, paradigm is not threatening to an Adventist, but philosophy is, for many reasons. So instead of calling it philosophy, let's call it fundamental theology. There is actually no name in theology for this kind of discipline, because basically all theologians have gone to philosophy to solve this issue. So basically, philosophy is there. So either we call it philosophy, I have no problem calling it philosophy, or we call it more friendly, fundamental theology, and if you want another name, it doesn't matter. The issue is what we are going to study there, or criticize there, or do a fundamental thinking on that. And what is that? The view of reality. Philosophy deals with the view of reality, the basic, the general, the most inclusive view of reality. What are we doing as a scientist? We study reality. What is that philosophy does? Studies reality. What is the difference between the two? The scientist goes to the detail of reality. I was amazed by your presentation on the detail and the complexity of history. But the philosophers, we go to the other side and we look at reality in its broadest possible way. And I will have to leave it there. And it is the interaction between these broad commitments about what reality is or is not, and the way in which we define our methodology, that will determine, mandate the conclusions of what you can do or not do in your disciplines. Of course, it will occur differently in different disciplines. Now, what is now the issue? The issue is that my discovery, remember, the discovery of reality being temporal, is at odds with the philosophical tradition. The entire philosophical tradition, even to our day, with few exceptions, believe that ultimately reality is timeless. There are a few avant-garde philosophers that have not been embraced by the mainline denominations, including by the mainline, the Roman Catholic Church, that actually argue that reality is temporal. Among them, most distinguished philosopher, Heidegger, in the last century. Among the 5 most important philosophers of our times, you find Plato and Heidegger. Plato determined the history of Christianity and Western civilization up to our days, so that some philosophers say that all our history is a footnote to Plato. And Heidegger challenged the view of Plato, not just challenged it, it replaced it. But our society, even postmodernity, has not gone there. So this is the parting of the ways. This is the partings of interpretation. The point is that this is a macro parting. And the point is that that's what we Adventists did. So our way of looking at things is a macro departure from everything. And I could speak, and I do on other occasions about this. So what are the consequences for research? These 2 views of realities shape 2 views of understanding the paradigm understood as methodology of what we do, and then creates 2 programs of research. When I am saying 2, I am talking macro, and you will see how this includes all that we do in research. So program 1 is an interpretation through a particular, what Dr. LaBianca was mentioning as our desired history, or desired past. The desired past. Okay, so it comes from a desired paradigm. And this is the traditional Christian ecumenical, which basically means 99%, all others that are not Adventists, basically. And then there is this other one that we can do, which is the one that it is the temporal. One is based on the ontological choice. Program 1 follows timelessness, program 2 follows time. And based on data, I am talking here theology only, and philosophy. I am not talking all the other sciences. I am talking only that, theology/philosophy, based on tradition the first, and in the second, the Adventist, it will be based on the Bible. So let me show you the flow of these things. Philosophy, these macro-philosophical ideas determined by philosophical thinking that is based on humans thinking on what they see in nature, develop this basic macro-hermeneutical presupposition, the interpretation of the macro-hermeneutical presupposition that is the broad view of reality. Heaven, earth, what is the nature, is historical, is not historical, all this kind of stuff. And this determines what we need and the commitments that we can have or not have methodologically, the big methodological paradigm. And that, from that perspective, scientific disciplines, including theology, philosophy, all the disciplines develop. Most of us that are in the disciplines have no idea of these things. Probably that's you when you were listening to me. What in the world you were talking about? Well, this is what happens because we come to the scientific discipline looking at data and data and data and trying to interpret without having an idea, a critical idea of how our minds work or how we have a right to our conclusions. But what if? So now I am suggesting a what if. Instead of using the human philosophical ideas to explain these macro-hermeneutical presuppositions that give us the guiding view of reality, we go to the Bible and we take what the Bible says about those macro-hermeneutical presuppositions and we take that interpretation that we have in the Bible. And believe me, those things are in the Bible. And believe me, in the Bible they are completely and radically opposed to all these other assumptions that we find in philosophy. What if we would do so? Can we do so as Adventists? Yes. As I see what happens in universities, and I don't know what happens here in our university and all the universities, Adventist universities in the world, I assume that most of what we do in our research, including theology, mainly that's what I know more, is depending not on biblical philosophical ideas, is depending on this other tradition. And we have a complete different view of looking at things that will allow us to develop our research creatively and in faithfulness to the Bible. What is that important for me? Well, because I believe that God has revealed himself in the Bible, and because I belong to a denomination whose first fundamental belief is precisely that. So now, if we do this based on the Sola Scriptura principle, we will develop this view of things. And I want to enlarge this. It will apply this macro change to what we do in theology, the hard sciences, and the soft sciences, and I put the disciplines that I know in exegesis, some of them, not all of them, exegesis, Old Testament and New Testament, their methodology, because these are big commitments, but the methodology exists only at the level of the discipline. The methodology does not exist at the level of generalities. A macro-methodological paradigm will express itself in the disciplinary methodologies, and the hard sciences will have different disciplines and methods, and the soft sciences different disciplines and methods, which at the end of the day will allow us to see this reality, which will be the history and the superposition of all these things, in a macro global way that will be coherent only because we have these shared beliefs that come from the Bible, and this is a belief and this is a commitment that we have, as Kuhn said, that all scientists do. So I am enunciating. Conclusion. The connection between philosophy and sola scriptura, which is the essential building block of Adventism, requires the development of this research program. Of course, there are other reasons for that, not just that one. But I am trying to appeal that to you because we all belong to this community, and this is a shortcut. If I were talking to non-Adventist scientists, then I would have to argue in another way that, of course, I can do. Now, one person cannot do this. This was a realization as I started 35 years ago. I can, you know, like the Disney thing, you know. I think I can. And certainly, the more I was getting to the Emeritus professor experience, I think I cannot. I think that I have to convince my students to do it because nobody can do it of its own, and I think that this is something that we will be doing if we decide to go this way until the time that Jesus comes. And therefore, it requires an interdisciplinary team, and it should involve eventually the entire universities, all the universities in the world, and even our church, in a global understanding of formation. That's it.